Hey everybody, welcome back to All Things Real Estate. I am your host, Ari Wintraub, and I'm excited for today, episode 18, our first time doing a remote interview via Zoom with executive Bill Witte of Related, California. Bill and his company are the largest owner of affordable housing units in the nation. And 37 years ago, he started Related California, which also is known for building the most luxurious, full-service, high-end residential leasing and condo buildings in California. There are some iconic buildings like the Seychelles or the Grand, or what I learned in the interview, the Century, which has units that sell upwards of $20 million. So it was a very informative conversation, seeing how they blend a business plan, doing both not only just market rate housing, but top of market rate luxury housing, along with the affordable. Bill Witte, I have never actually met in person, although he was a client of mine, and I sold a family unit of his that he owned in Echo Park. So this podcast was a chance for us to see each other face to face, electronically, and to be able to chat, get to know each other a little bit more. It's nice to finally see you. I know we've only talked on the phone before. So yeah, to get into the interview, I thought first it'd be great to get to know you by asking the question, if you were to think back 4 decades ago.
To get invited back. And if you do something that doesn't stand the test of time, it limits your heal. For example, downtown LA, like downtown San Francisco, got hit very hard by COVID and hasn't really fully recovered. There's only so much you can do about that. You have to hope that government or whoever pick up the pieces and improve it. Is requiring cities to zone for housing and slowly eroding the ability of not in my backyard groups to contest and block housing. It's not perfect, but it's a lot better than it was. But we still have a huge supply and demand imbalance.
All right, well, we're going to get into it. And so it's nice to finally see you. I know we've only talked on the phone before. So yeah, to get into the interview, I thought first it'd be great to get to know you by asking the question, if you were to think back 4 decades ago when you were in Philadelphia working in a government role as an urban planner, did you ever imagine that you'd be running California's largest luxury development firm?
Well, we're not the largest, I think, but the answer is no. I didn't know what I was going to be doing the next year, let alone 40 years.
Right. And did it come as a surprise that to yourself when you look back, like that's what you ended up doing out here?
I did not have a typical trajectory. I worked in government in Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., San Francisco till I was 30. And I reached a point where I felt like I was a referee most of the time in government, and I wanted to actually do things, which led to my making the change. But no, at the time, I didn't foresee it.
That's an interesting role you felt you were playing as a referee. Can you elaborate on that? Is that maybe
when you worked in the 80s, I was running housing and economic development for then Mayor Dianne Feinstein. And so we did financing programs. We enabled things to happen, but you were an enabler or, as I said, a referee on competing factions, but you weren't the one actually building or doing the project.
Right. Okay. So fast forward to doing the projects and having created Related California and running it as the chairman and CEO for 37 years. The company I know from showing as a leasing and sales agent your projects, the Seychelles in Santa Monica, the Grand downtown as of recent, the 700 Broadway off Lincoln in Santa Monica, and your projects are the gold standard for multifamily development. What is in the Related DNA and the philosophy that you built at that company that makes you guys stand out amongst the other typical institutional developers?
I think some of it is that obviously not on for sale condominiums, but we're really a long-term. So the project has stand the test of time, and it has to remain competitive over time. The other thing is we have so many projects involving government agencies that it's a brand. In other words, you're in the public eye, you're in the public domain, and it's a combination of like to get invited back. And if you do something that doesn't stand the test of time, it limits your heal. And some of it is a standard set by, our financial partners in New York. Related was founded in 1972 by Steve Ross as a developer and syndicator of HUD Section 8 housing. That's Related's roots. And my background is in affordable housing as well, which we still do a lot of. But I think, you're spending a little more money to have the premium product. So you also have to believe that you're going to get premium value for that, because as an investor developer, you're not doing it just to be in an art museum.
Exactly. That makes great sense that, in order to be invited back, you need to create a product that is going to stand the test of time, and the government agencies that you're partnering with, like what you did. What are those things that you maybe have learned that don't get invited you back, that like in a project that didn't stand the test of time? When I think of something standing the test of time, I think of finished materials, which is, I know, on a much more shallow level. But what are the things that either work or don't work over time in terms of that partnership?
Well, I think when we talk about standing the test of time, it's probably in real estate terms more about economic value. We haven't had a situation where I look back and say, boy, we really undershot the mark there. The question sometimes is location or circumstances beyond your control. For example, downtown LA, like downtown San Francisco, got hit very hard by COVID and hasn't really fully recovered. There's only so much you can do about that. You have to hope that government or whoever pick up the pieces and improve things. It's not terrible, but for example, Century City has benefited at the expense of downtown since COVID. So it's really more about that, about missing the market, or, one of the things that has guided Related in not only here, but in New York is you're building markets that are difficult to develop. It's not Houston or Phoenix where all of a sudden 3,000 units might just pop up next to you because it's a free market. And so, it's competitive to get in. There's usually not an oversupply in submarkets, which is helpful. But as I said about downtown LA, for example, sometimes there's circumstances beyond your control.
Got it. Yeah, makes perfect sense. So focusing on downtown LA, the Grand, along Grand Avenue across from the Broad Museum and next to the Modern Art Museum, really changed the skyline of LA. What was it like partnering with a visionary architect like Frank Gehry to maintain the building being iconic, as his designs are, but keeping it so it's profitable, functional, and cost effective?
Well, I think both of us had to make concessions. Frank typically doesn't work on commercial projects. He's done some, but where he's made his biggest imprint is museums, institutions, things like that, where economics are secondary. And when we, for example, started planning Grand Avenue, the first three levels were to be retail or non-residential. And the initial plan, very Gehry, had, waves of space and everything. And the guy who had our mixed use group had to say to Frank, no one's going to go into the store because they can't even see where it is. So, and if you, relative to certainly a lot of what he's done, if you look at the Grand, yeah, I think it's very striking, but it's toned down by Gehry standards.
Got it. So like a good marriage, it's about making concessions each
That's
partner.
right. And, we're used to being able to tell architects, I'm sorry, you're going to do what we want. Can't quite do that with Frank.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, oh, really? So we had to just make it work, and he rest in peace, but I think it did.
It did. It looks fantastic. And talking about the retail component, you guys did something very creative during COVID when either retail was trying to stand the test of time and was facing challenges with a void of people and pedestrian traffic in downtown. And I want to hear about what you guys did to help utilize this space when maybe there was a lack of commercial tenants wanting to rent it.
Well, first of all, we had some interim leases like for art galleries, so institutional stuff, things like that, to let things catch up post-COVID. That's beginning to happen. We have some food and beverage. People will be going in. University of Michigan is opening a satellite, I don't know what you call it, campus, but space there. So this is true with retail space in general over the last 10 years, is that the nature of potential tenants changes.
Yeah, and that's what I was referring to is the pivot, how you guys brought in the Basquiat gallery space. I'd never seen retail. Typically, and I wonder if you can confirm my hunch on this, on a mixed use project, the apartments get leased up first and the ground level retail will still stay vacant for, it seemed like, a long time, and the landlord is not necessarily so fussed about it. Is that because maybe they get their refinance based on the majority of the income coming from the apartment units, and once they get to that point and they, get the refinance, it's an afterthought for the commercial downstairs?
It's not a refinance issue, which hasn't occurred. It is true that the project that is predominantly residential usually is a little cautious on underwriting the retail. So the initial financing is more dependent on a successful lease up of the predominant residential use. But some of it's circumstantial. For example, we built the grant literally during COVID. So the pace of lease up everywhere slowed. It's not that we intentionally held it out.
Got it.
Some of it's timing.
Yeah, makes sense. What do you think downtown needs to do to get itself out of its current slump?
I think a couple of things. First, I think the city needs to pay more attention to the little things: clean streets, security. Grand Avenue is better off than much of downtown, given it's somewhat separate. But a lot of it's what I would call blocking and tackling. Another thing I think, which isn't affecting us, we don't have an office user, is downtown has lost a lot of office users to West LA and Century City. And I think the city, the mayor, whomever, needs to be engaging in the commercial real estate world more earlier before people make decisions. Because once they make decisions, they even sign a new lease, it's too late. So I think it's a combination of there's no one big thing, but I think it needs to pick up its game in terms of paying attention to those quality of life issues.
Okay, so staying on that track about the public and the sector and the government doing their bit, after 4 decades with a big focus in affordable low-income housing, what have you seen the city and the state get right when so many people right now are down and out on the government here in LA and California? What have you seen them get right and gives you hope for them in the future?
Well, you have to come back. What does government control and what does it not control? And Governor Newsom, you can have mixed feelings about him, but he's been the most pro-housing governor we've had, in the sense putting teeth into requirements that cities have these housing plans or housing elements that have to be approved by the state, and goals toward meeting these regional housing needs assessment numbers. And for example, we're doing projects in Laguna Beach and Newport Beach that frankly might have been blocked, but for government involvement with cities all over the state. So what I think people are doing better is, I'll call it the land use side, is requiring cities to zone for housing and slowly eroding the ability of not in my backyard groups to contest and block housing. It's not perfect, but it's a lot better than it was. But we still have a huge supply and demand imbalance. And I think in the larger economy, you have this inequality with a lot of high-level white-collar jobs and a lot of lower income jobs, but not as many jobs in the middle. So you have a growing need for affordable housing and sort of this workforce in the middle that either has to move further out or is less expensive, or in some cases leave the state.
Right. Makes sense. I wanted to ask, on the affordable housing front, it's a big mandate at Related. How has that helped or maybe hindered your guys' projects over the years?
In my opinion, it's a question, it's help. First of all, it's just Related is now just owner of affordable housing in the country, some from development, some from acquisitions. We have,
You're the second
I
largest.
don't know,
You say second?
first largest
Oh, wow. Of affordable housing units.
of affordable housing.
That's incredible.
I think it's like 60,000 units of subsidized housing. First off, we'd be busy doing that even in a recession because there's always a need in high cost areas for affordable housing. So from a business point of view, that's helpful. But I'll give you another LA example of how it's on the margin help. When we got approved to build our 40-story condominium in Century City in 2005, the Century, when we meeting with community groups in West LA, ready to demonize a developer. When they saw what we were doing elsewhere in LA with low income and affordable housing and public housing redevelopment, couldn't demonize us. You might or might not agree with the project, but nobody could say, "Oh my God, look at these rich assholes." You can think that, but when they looked at the full scope of our work, they would have a different view. And I think on the margin, that's been helpful.
Right. I bet it has. We worked together on selling, I think it was your goddaughter's condo.
My niece.
Your niece. Your niece. And through working on selling that, a very modest unit comparative to the stuff like at the Century or at the Seychelles, I found that you had a very sober, realistic perspective as a seller, which is not so common as a sales agent, that you understood there was a certain market price and that was going to dictate what we listed for, opposed to what you wanted for the unit or maybe what you paid for it and what you hoped you can get for it. And that served us well. And it was an effective, efficient sale. Is that something that you find that you gathered from your experience at Related?
I don't know about my experience with Related, but being involved in real estate, you have to be sensitive to markets. And I remember about that unit a couple of things. One, it was pretty modest, but the market price was over 500,000. Now I remember I agreed this a little while ago, but I thought to myself, 500,000 used to be a lot of money, and now it's like the bottom of the market. So on the one hand, no, there was a huge price, but on the other, I thought, you know what? I'm not sure I'd have paid that if I were the buyer. So if you looking at the larger market and what's out there and locations and everything, you have a perspective.
Exactly. Yeah. And I guess being a professional, you're accustomed to that, looking at the market, making a calculated idea. I want to get your opinion because I know we got about 5 minutes left. In your experience, if you were in a position that I am now, I am a general partner. I run a 10-unit apartment building in Silver Lake at the top of a block. It's a very good block, very desirable. It's at Sunset and it's prime ground zero of Silver Lake where everyone is. Below us, for the rest of the block, there are 3 other property owners that own 4 other buildings. Would you see the value in making a play that I'm in touch with them? I'm talking about who's a seller, of trying to pick up their properties and owning the entire block to one day try and entitle it and sell it entitled for someone to build 300 apartments? Or is it the more value in building it, getting entitled, and owning it?
Well, the former theoretically would create more value. But if you look at LA politically, especially now, the likelihood of being able to demolish, 30 or 40 units, 300, certainly with this city council, you would have a lot of pushback and then some. So, if I were you, I wouldn't bet the ranch. option number 2 or number 1?
Entitle it and let someone else kind of execute.
Well, it depends what you're asking. Yeah. First of all, I don't know that you get it
Right. Yeah.
for because or it just happened in Hollywood, or they say, oh, taking out 30 units. Well, you can build 250 units, but you have to set aside 60 of them for low income. I mean, it would encumber the economics so much it wouldn't be worth it.
Right. Yeah. Makes sense. Well, I got one last question.
Okay,
What would you have done different?
not much. There are a couple of projects, not so much Grand Avenue, but a very large one in Santa Clara, 240 redevelopment of a 240-acre golf course, or even in the early stages of Grand Avenue, a faster development stage. I personally spent a huge amount of time to uncertain economics at the end, although I feel good about Grand Avenue. The other one is economically stuck at the moment. I could have been spending time on more viable things. So there are few instances where you look back and you say, I wish I didn't spend 2 years chasing my tail on this one. I could have been over here. But for the most part, I don't have any regrets.
Yeah. Well, I don't imagine you would. You have a very commendable career and really appreciate you coming on and getting a chance to get to know you some more.
All right. Well,
Okay.
nice to catch up. We'll talk soon.
Okay, Bill.
Bye-bye.
Bye.